Alafia, and welcome once again to the online Ifa classroom. My name is David Graham, or Awo Ifa Foray. And as you can probably notice from this video, my wonderful, loving wife gifted me some YouTubing lights that she says will improve the quality of these videos. I asked her why anybody would possibly want to see me better, but I guess that's a discussion for another time. I want to start by saying happy Thanksgiving to those of you who celebrate the holiday. And on this day, where it is typical for us to take some time for contemplation and for giving thanks, I found that one of the things that I was most thankful for, as always, is my spirituality, my personal practice of the Ifa tradition. And anytime I think along those lines, it leads me to, kind of my biggest question and my biggest gripe. And that is why we don't, as Ifa practitioners, excel at coming together as a community. If Ifa wants to be truly considered and taken seriously in the world philosophies or the world religions, it's high time that we put aside our differences and we celebrate our diversity and we celebrate the different branches of our tradition. For better or for worse, I spend a good amount of time online interacting with other Ifa practitioners, studying this philosophy, following African traditional religion on social media. One of the things that I see, sadly, more often than not, is rather than Ifa practitioners from different paradigms or different branches coming together, I see most of the people worried about who's right, who's wrong, who's the highest and mightiest, who's the most powerful. That's my favorite. Who's doing things correctly and traditionally, and a lot of mudslinging and denigrating of one another and our practices, our ways of doing things. And frankly, it's just insanity. And the reason that it's insanity is that because Ifa is an oral tradition, that has been passed down through generations via the oral word rather than the written word, it's impossible for anyone to know the way that it was originally done. And I'll say that again. It is impossible for anyone to know with any certainty the way that it was originally done. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's about what's effective for the individual, what is most effective for the community, what is most effective in the locale and area and culture that you live, and what gives you the greatest connection to spirit. And I think that that's one of the most overlooked points of our Ifa philosophy today. Case in point or example, if you grew up in a time and place where you either had to slaughter your own food or seeing animals slaughtered was a normal day-to-day event, and this was supported and embraced by your community, then it would be entirely logical and appropriate to have the community come out and pray for you during any one of the Ifa religious rites and have an animal killed at that time and place and celebrate, your rite of passage and hopefully break down and consume the animal as a community. If you grew up in a time and place like many of us where you went and got your meat from a grocery store, then it might be completely antithetical to have an animal slaughtered on your behalf at your ceremony. In fact, it may do more harm than good. As a side note, I was speaking to a young lady this week about her initiations. Because like many of you or many folks out there, she was initiated, given some tools, and given no instruction on what to do with them. And I asked her during your initiation, did you feel elevated? Did you feel supported? Did you feel embraced? Did you feel comforted? And her answer was no. I felt confused. I felt afraid. I didn't know what was going on. Nothing was explained to me. I didn't feel that my spirit was elevated. I did not feel possessed by positive, enlightening energies. So I would argue that depending on the time and place that you live and the culture that you live in, certain rites done certain ways may or may not be more effective. But I said all that to say that it's time to stop fighting over who's right, who's wrong, whose initiations were effective, whose initiations weren't effective, what the Orisha's numbers are, what the Orisha's colors are, what Orisha takes what herbs. And these arguments go on ad nauseum. Um, and I would argue that they're a way to divide the community. They're a way to charge people more money to redo things that have already been done. They're a way to, in some crazy manner, assume or believe that you're all powerful or godlike. And again, I go back to, it's not who's right or wrong, it's who's effective for the client at the time, who's effective for the community at the time, what is effective at elevating the person's consciousness to a new level so they can improve their life. Certainly there are better and worse ways of doing things. Certainly there are more effective ways of doing things. But rather than fight and argue and pick at each other, maybe it's time we celebrate and embrace our differences, embrace our diversity. Understand that the African way of doing things is going to be completely different than a Latin American way of doing things, which may be completely different than a suburban Anglo way of doing things, but that they're all fine and that they're all part of the same tradition, and we're all beautiful in Olodumare's eyes. And if you don't look around and see that Olodumare loves diversity, then you're blind. Then something is wrong with your perception, not only of this faith, but of the world that we live in. So it's time to stop the insanity. It's time to stop the denigration. It's time to stop the picking apart of each other's ways of doing things, and to celebrate that we're all Orisha practitioners. We're all Ifa practitioners. We all love this planet and hopefully love each other and love the communities that we live in and the families that we're a part of. And we just celebrate those energies in different ways. A fantastic story, and then I'll sign off for the day, is a few weeks ago I was lucky enough to be introduced to a awo out of Cuba, because Cuba is somewhere I really want to go, and I want to experience the Orisha tradition as they practice it in Cuba, which, by the way, will be very, very different than the way that I was taught by my Ifa elders and the way that I practice it here. But it was very refreshing because we had a very long online dialogue. And we discussed different points of how we practice the tradition. And there were some marked differences there. But never once was it, you're right, or I'm right, you're wrong, my way's better, whoever taught you didn't know what they were doing. We almost both instantly honed in on the fact that we're doing the same things. We're just getting there differently. And a lot of the differences are cultural, and a lot of the differences are depending on which branch of the Ifa tradition you're talking about. And again, they're both fine. His way is certainly going to be more effective for the people that he works with in his time, place, locale, and culture, as hopefully mine is. And it's not our place to say who's right and who's wrong. It's our place to celebrate that there are different ways of practicing this tradition, and that they're all effective, and that they all work, and they all make a better life for the community, for the people that we work with and work for. And most importantly, that if your life gets better, my life gets better. That's the point of the whole thing, ladies and gentlemen, is to make a better life for you and your children, to make a better planet for us all. So that was my Thanksgiving message, or my Thanksgiving diatribe. And again, I'm very thankful to have this spiritual path. I'm very thankful for my elders for teaching me. I'm very thankful to Olodumare and for the Orishas for guiding me, for expanding my worldview and my understanding of self and world. And I take time out this Thanksgiving to remember that, and to remember that we need to be accepting of all man, but most importantly, or especially the people with the same worldview that we have. And instead of picking each other apart, let's work really hard to lift each other up. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.